All right. Let's see. Okay, it's being recorded. Everybody, welcome to Section 1 study group. So just to get started, we're going to answer some questions that just came up. Kishore just had a question about what are the expectations for coming to study group? Like, should you have like done a bunch of readings yet? Should you like have completed labs by this? So short answer, no, there's no expectation for you having like done all the sections before coming here. For the most part, the way I like to do study groups is really pick out the important bits from lesson and like kind of synthesize them in a way that I think will help you understand the concepts better. So it doesn't really matter if you've already gone through the readings or not. I think it does help for sure. I know some instructors say that it's better to like, do all the readings first, come to study groups and then do the lab. So you're doing like, cause on Learn we have readings and also labs. So it's like, I think you would like read every other lesson and then come to study group and do every other lesson. But I don't think it's necessary. I understand that everyone's on like a different schedule. The only expectation is that by end of Sunday, you would have done the sections that were for the week. And also, I will mention for most sections actually, that not all lessons are super important. I'll definitely mention which are the more important things, which are the less important things, so that you can better scope out like what to focus on, because there is a lot of material. So there's that. I had another question earlier about working on Learn and saving your work. So in one of the labs I think there's a lab talking about like how you work with Learn. So if any of you remember working on bootcamp prep, if any of you did that, on bootcamp prep, you'll see that your code saves on learn.co, and that was great. However, during this curriculum, when you're part of the actual bootcamp, it does not save. So it doesn't save on the website. So what you have to do is you do the forking and the cloning, and it's on your local machine, and all your work that you do on your local machine will be saved there. So it's really up to you what you want to do. Some people like to clone every single reading and lab just so they have everything on their computers. Some people like to just clone the lab, so anything that they need to work on is cloned and saved on their computers. However you work on that is really up to you. And how we track your progress is what you have to do is just you click the finish reading button on Learn. I know it's kind of annoying to like switch between like working locally and like clicking the button when you're done, but just do that. And the way that we can see your changes is when you do a git push on the stuff that you were working on. If you do like the steps, one of the labs says it, if you do the steps add, commit, and push, your work will be pushed onto your GitHub. We're going to talk a lot more about GitHub on Monday, so don't worry too much about that. So that's working with Learn. Any other like overall questions?
Oh, can I have something related to that?
Yeah.
Will we have access to the learn.co material after graduating or after?
Yeah, you're going to get access to Learn for Life. Yeah, you'll always have access to these materials. I think that's partially why some people like to clone everything, like just in case something happens and like all our stuff gets nuked. I don't know that. I don't think that's going to happen, but like definitely some people do that to be safe. Any other questions? Awesome. Just to let you guys know, I'm the kind of teacher who likes to be interrupted. So like whenever you have like a question or something that doesn't make sense, please just come off mute and just like let me know that you have a question. So before we start getting into like the actual material, there's some stuff that I wanted to show you and go through. I'm just gonna share my entire desktop right now. Let's see.
I think you need to share the screen.
Yeah, hold on, I'm getting a little sharing issue. Here we go. I want to share my Slack screen, but it isn't working. Here. Does everyone see this? Okay, awesome. So on Slack, I don't know if you guys have like played around with it yet. We're doing daily stand-ups, and daily stand-ups are really, really important just to like, you know, keep motivated and just keep yourself accountable. So please do that, because that's like helpful for me to track your progress since we only meet like twice a week. Something else that I've added is there's a link on top. I don't know if anyone's clicked it yet, but I'm a big fan of spreadsheets, and like I like to have everything organized in one place. And I know all the links are on the Learn homepage, but if you click on this, I just have like collated together all the resources that we've used so far. So here's our Google Calendar. HackerRank is something that I'm going to introduce later. Projects, don't worry about that yet. Study group materials, I'll talk about that later as well. The one-on-one links, and this is like the study group Zoom link. So if you just, I don't know, it's just for people who like use spreadsheets, this is for you. Something else that I wanted to show you really quick is there's a questions document. So as you know, I know a lot of you guys are like not free during the daytime. I unfortunately work during this daytime. So a lot of times, like when your questions come in at night, I might not see them. And a really good way to keep track of questions is through this document. I found that classes who properly, like not properly, but like really utilize this document have like a good repository of like just questions answered. And it just becomes a really good resource. So whenever you have a question, leave it under the section. It really doesn't have to be super organized. I have like minor OCD, so like I will once in a while come in and organize all the questions if I feel like I have to, but I'll be keeping track of this document. So feel free to leave any questions that you have regarding anything, post screenshots if you want, because sometimes that really helps. Finally, if you see a question that you know or you think you know the answer to, feel free to like put a comment down and like give it a shot, or like leave an answer if you want as well. Like there's a real benefit in like helping each other out here. Let's see, any questions about the questions? Cool. I will say that this is for like less time sensitive things. So if you have like a huge problem, like, I don't know, your computer is breaking down, throw that in the Slack channel. And if it's super time sensitive, tag like the DS support squad, because some instructors do work later hours than I do. Cool. So that is this. I really hope that you guys utilize this resource. Cool. And yeah, this stuff, not important right now. Did anyone have any questions regarding like just general things before I start getting into material for section 1? Was there a question that I forgot to answer? I don't remember. I should write it. I should have written it down. But cool, I've addressed like working with Learn. We're gonna talk about environment setup in a little bit, but cool. All right, let's start with some material.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
I was wondering if maybe you could mention, I may have missed it or forgotten about, kind of like what exactly we're expected to do with regard to the blog stuff, and like I think you had to do one with regard to just like intro stuff.
Yeah, the blog stuff is a little bit, yeah, I didn't really go that into it when I talked about it on Monday. So a graduation requirement, and this is a strict one, is that you have to have published 7 blogs by the end of the program. And out of the 7 blogs, 5 of the blogs will be project related, so don't worry about that. The other 2 blogs can be about anything you want. We suggest that the first blog be about how you found data science, about like why you're choosing to come into data science. So there's that. And also secondly, where you do these blogs can be of your choosing. So there is a blogging platform within Learn, so you can choose to use that. And that is actually like tracked internally as well. My preference actually is using medium.com, just because it's like you can get a lot of reach there. It actually does kind of work as like a networking tool too, because people read your posts and can like comment on them, and you just like make connections that way. And also someone had mentioned using GitHub pages. Not GitHub, is it? Yeah, GitHub has like a blogging tool as well. I'm not super familiar with that one, but like wherever you think works best for you, as long as it's somewhere public. And so if you don't choose to publish on Learn, just let me know where your blog is and I can just keep track of it like that. Cool. So the suggestion is to write your first blog in the first 2 weeks just because there's less curriculum. I know it doesn't feel that way, but there is less curriculum. So to get the first blog out of the way, that's a good idea. If you don't want to write it about why data science, you're allowed to write it on anything related to data science. Like I've seen topics ranging from like some things that are technical, like if you want to take a deep dive into like the terminal, you can do that. I've also seen blog posts talking about networking tips for, well, I guess now we can't really do networking events, but like networking tips, I guess you could do like an online networking tips if that's your area of expertise. So anything that like, you know, you can tie to data science and a career in data science will go. So that's blogs. Cool. Anything else? All right, I'm gonna start this session by talking about the data science process, because I know you're not really at this stage yet, but when you start looking for data science jobs, you're gonna realize that it is extremely inconsistent and extremely like vague what different data science jobs are. So like data science is a fairly new field. A lot of students that graduate will get very different job titles. So some of the job titles include, of course, data scientist. Another very common one is data analyst, data engineer, solutions engineer, data engineer. Did I say that? Whatever. A bunch of different job titles, and they all take some subset of this overall data science process. And what's really annoying as well is that now at different companies, if you have like, let's say you have the data science position, a data scientist position at like 5 different companies, you could be doing like 5 different things. So one, it's important to read job titles, but 2, it's good that in this program, we get like the full process. So there are many different ways that people put out the data science lifecycle. They're like, this one's in 7 steps. I've seen like a 5-step one. I've seen like a 10-step one, but I think this 7-step one kind of like gives you a good overview. The data science lifecycle, here we have like business understanding. So you need to understand the problem that you're trying to solve. You're going to collect data, clean data, explore the data, feature engineering, which is, we're actually going to get to that in like section 5. Manipulating whatever data you have for your analysis, predictive modeling, which we'll get to in the end of module 2, and this part will bring us through to mods 3 and 4, and then visualizations. Just within mod 1, we're gonna hit this entire life cycle with the exception of the predictive modeling part. So that's super exciting. I won't talk too much about this because this is something that you can all go and read. So let's see. Now I'm going to talk about environment setup. And with that, I'm going to bring up my terminal. Do you guys see my terminal window? No, okay. All right, I used to have a second monitor, but I left the power cord at where I used to work, so I don't have that anymore. Here's my terminal. So with environment setup, you're expected to like use your terminal to do that. So some basic things in terminal. The first thing I like to do is ls. ls basically lists all the things that are there. So you can see these are all my folders that I have in the base of my directory. ls is important. Another good one is pwd, which means print working directory. So this is where I am. I'm just like in the base. And when you do ls, these are basically all the places that you can go. So I know that I've made this folder called ds, and that's for all my data science things. And to move into that folder, I use cd. cd stands for change directory, and I do cdds to get into ds. So if I print working directory here, you can see that I'm in ds. And if I ls, you can see all my stuff in ds. Cool. Some cool, fun shortcut tips, I guess some other commands that you can use. To go back out of a folder, you do cd and double period. And that brings you back to it brings you back one back. Another thing you can do if you have like CD DS, and let's say I CD into DS lessons. If I want to go all the way back to home, I just type CD, and that brings me all the way back to home. Cool, those are just some good things to remember. Earlier, someone mentioned about like getting stuck somewhere where there's no such directory or no such file. Edward, I think that was you. Yes. If you get that error, you should do a PWD to just make sure you're in the right place. So with that setting up environment one, I believe you want to be, let me see where this is. I go into DS and we go CD into labs. And cool. So this is your environment setup one. See that? And so you want to make sure that you're inside of that. So you're going to do CD, DSC, blah, blah, blah. Another tip is your terminal has autocomplete. So if you press tab, it autocompletes for as long as like there's something unique. So I press tab, all of them start with DSC. So I got to keep typing. I think that's the only one that goes like after DSC dash, it's data science, and that's the only one that starts with a V. Press tab, it autocompletes. I don't have to type all of that stuff. And I'm in there. I think that should solve your problem, Edward. Other problems with that I will talk about later. But that's just a really quick overview of like the things that you need to know for terminal. Any questions about anything that I just said?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah, what's up?
What distinguishes, like what do you look for within these lines of code to try to help you like understand where you are, or like where the computer is at right now?
Mm-hmm. So where the computer is at right now, I think the best way to do it is PWD. So PWD basically tells you, it gives you the full path of where your computer is. So the way that my computer is set up is I have like a bunch of users. There's Ish, which is me. And then after that, I went into my DS folder. I had a folder for labs, and then I'm in this particular lab folder. So PWD, I think it's really helpful for that. Answer your question? Cool. Awesome. Anything else?
So Yish, so if we want to create a specific folder for, I mean, under the user itself, if we want to have a specific place where this terminal just takes you there, I mean, not to other folders where you have so many other things. What exactly you need to move to that particular folder?
So I am kind of like, I guess, not super into like using the terminal, where I don't like to like move and make folders in the terminal, because I feel like, you know, you can make a mistake and just create a bunch of random folders. That has happened. One thing that I like to do is just do wherever you want to make this folder or like move stuff. Let's actually like go all the way back to my DS folder. I literally just type open period. So in terminal, period just means all. So I do like open period, and I don't think you'll see this. Let me change, sorry, I have to change my share again so you see my entire screen. Here. So I did open period. Let me do that again. And it just automatically opens up wherever it is I'm at. And so with that, I can create new folders like this. And I think that's a safer way to do it. There are commands to do like new folders. I think it is mkdir to make new directory. I honestly just think it's safer to like, you know, make new folders like this. You can drag and drop, and it'll all like automatically update in your terminal. So you don't have to worry about that.
Okay. The specific question I had was the terminal, where whenever you get into a terminal, it takes you to your user folder. So it's like that's the place where all the downloads usually happen, all the applications. So which is the application that we need to shift to a particular section where if I let's say bifurcate the hard drive, and I just want specific hard drive for this only. I mean.
Oh, okay. So there's something that you can do, like you can create shortcuts such that it'll automatically bring you there. It does get a little complicated, but after this, I will send out like, there are a couple guides to creating these shortcuts, so I can send you that. So in that case, for example, like I don't want to keep typing like CD blah, blah, blah. Every time I need to get to a folder, you can create a shortcut to do that. And so I'll send out a resource for that. Yeah, I personally don't like to do that because every time if I move a folder somewhere else, the shortcut breaks. So I'll send out that resource anyways, just so like it does make it convenient. I'll send out that resource, but I'm not going to talk too in depth about it right now.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's all about, if you want to know the words, it's about editing your bash profile.
Okay.
Which is basically what you guys did to make your learn environment your default environment. But we'll get into that later.
Okay.
All right. So now that I'm here, I actually have this on my desktop. I basically made a notebook for this lesson. So I'm going to open up Jupyter Notebook. Here you go. I'm also going to change the screen share so that it'll be cleaner on the video. All right. So this is basically an overview of section 1. There are two main parts. There's setting up your environment and Python 101. This notebook I'm going to send out to all of you later, so don't worry about like taking notes or anything. So first off, with setting up your environment, we had a bunch of new terms that were just introduced in this section. First of all, there's Anaconda. You all had to download Anaconda to start with like setting up your environment. And Anaconda is basically a package management system. And packages, they're hard to explain without context, but they're basically like libraries that house methods for doing different things. If that didn't make sense, don't worry. But Anaconda just makes it easier for you to like download functionality for your Python stuff. And then there is Git, which is a version control system for tracking changes and coordinating code. And Git for us works with GitHub. There are actually other like GitHub-like sites where you can do that, but almost everyone uses GitHub. So we use Git with GitHub. So Git and GitHub are not the same thing. GitHub is a website that has all our stuff, but Git is what allows us to interact with GitHub. And we'll talk a lot more about Git in the next study group. Next, there are Jupyter Notebooks and IPYNB files. So this right here is a Jupyter Notebook. What you see on LearnCo is actually Jupyter Notebooks embedded onto learn.co. And Jupyter Notebooks, their file suffix, is that what it's called? File extension is IPYNB, stands for IPython Notebook. Other than Jupyter Notebooks, traditional Python files end with a .py. We don't use them as much because as data scientists, as we're doing like analysis and testing models and like running code, Jupyter Notebook's a lot easier. And much later, we'll talk about Py files, but just know that the general Python files end with a .py. And then we have virtual environments, which is what we had to set up. What a virtual environment is that imagine I did a data science project 2 years ago. You'd be surprised in the span of 2 years, a lot of technology has advanced. Like a lot of the libraries that we use, like Pandas, NumPy, there have been a lot of updates in the past 2 years. What a virtual environment does is you can have this environment file. So as you were downloading the environment, you had either environment.yaml, YML is YAML, or windows.yaml, and that basically tells you all the versions of the different libraries you were using at that time. So because in the past 2 years, a lot of things could have changed, you want a snapshot of all the technologies you were using at that time to be replicated just in case, because if I were to take my old project and run it now, maybe back then I was using Python 2 and now I'm using Python 3, things might break. So having a virtual environment sort of gives you this like snow globe of packages that you were using at that time so that things will still run exactly the same way as it did before. Does that analogy make sense? Cool. And so why we have this learn environment is that this curriculum was created with very particular versions of different packages. So you can totally work without the learn environment. You just have to end up like downloading or installing very specific packages. So once you had downloaded that, when you created the environment using the environment file or the Windows file, that basically downloaded the specific versions of all of the packages that you needed for this stuff. Sound good? So that's what a virtual environment is. Common errors and fixes. These are 3 of the most common errors that keep popping up. Sometimes if you're like running, and they all come up when you're running the create environment line. So when you run that line, you'll see a bunch of things output. You're not expected to understand what any of that is, but one of the more common things is you'll see a lot of the word conflict, like just conflict happening. And with that, you can run this code here. And don't worry, I'll send this out so you don't have to like write it down or anything. Run that line before running that create environment. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it'll tell you that your bash wasn't activated, so you got to do that. And then there's also this really particular error that has been happening in the past year. I think it's a dependency with this one particular package called GraphViz. So what you can do is you can open up this particular file and then delete the line with Python GraphViz. If any of you are having environment setup problems, I think it's better to just make a one-on-one appointment with me, and then we can sort it out like that. I think everyone has such unique computers and unique problems that come with different computers, so it's a lot easier to just troubleshoot with your computer. Sound good? Anything else about setting up your environment before I move on, because we're going to talk about Python stuff? Awesome. All right, so this section when we talk about Python is they throw a lot of new stuff at you, and don't worry because a lot of this is going to be rehashed later in section 3, but this section introduces 3 main things. They introduce data types being like strings, numerics, Booleans and variables, collections, which are lists, dictionaries, sets, and tuples, and logic flows. These are all like, I think, the base building blocks of Python. So it's important that you get this good foundation. And here I have this link of like, if you want to like check how well you understand all this stuff, there's a little like practice problem at this link that you guys can see. I'll send it to the Slack channel later as well. It's a really good way to like, just check if you understand what's going on. So what I'm about to do is just give you a really brief overview on all of this stuff. And as usual, please feel free to interrupt me if something doesn't make sense. I know I can talk pretty fast. So yeah. So first we're gonna talk about strings. With strings, there are so many string methods. So what is a string? String is just text. So there is welcome to Flatiron School. Something interesting about Jupyter Notebook is in a Jupyter Notebook, it will output whatever the last line is. So if I like have multiple things here, like let's say I have like, I'm assigning a variable where a variable equals to stuff. That's not gonna matter. I mean, it does matter because it's still assigning stuff to variable, but it's only gonna output the last thing. So that's just a Jupyter Notebook specific thing. But don't worry about that. So here we have 2 strings. One is just the word welcome, and the other one is a longer string, welcome to Flatiron School. What I want you guys to get used to is using string methods and also reading documentation. So with strings, Python actually has a bunch of built-in string methods, a bunch of methods that you can use to manipulate or edit strings. And so this, I think, is a really good website that just summarizes all of that. You can see there are a bunch. I can tell you that I have not used every single one of these. I can also tell you that I do not remember all of these. Some of them I just remember from using a lot, like for example, Let's see, what's one that I use a lot? I use replace a lot. Sometimes I don't like white spaces in my text, so I just want to replace them with like something else. I use replace a lot. Let's see, there is capitalize, which will capitalize like the first character of each string. And the way that you use these kind of depends on the method itself. So something else that you're gonna have to get used to throughout the course is reading documentation. And documentation is basically what people who created Python and packages and stuff, they all write documentation to show you how to use this stuff. So just as a practice, let's look at the documentation for, I wanna look for title. So title converts the first character.
One quick question.
What's up?
It is like after the string, you just use say dot split or dot title. Whatever string we are going to use, we just say dot so and so thing.
Yeah, and that's what the documentation also tells you. So let's look at dot title, and here they actually hyperlink every single one to get more specific. So in this W3 website, they show you how to use every single method, which is great. So they always give you an example, which I think, at least for me, is the easiest way to figure out how to use something. So here you can see that they have this string, welcome to my world, and doing text.title. And so you can sort of get a hint that you want to do like your dot title. This talks about like, this has variables, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But here, usage. The syntax is string.title. Reading documentation does take some time to get used to, so I think it's a good idea to start with these like simpler methods. So the syntax is string.title. So what we're gonna do here, I always copy and paste. We can do, let's do on this one, welcome to Flatiron School, .title. And you can see, well, it was already capitalized, but the letter T here, it made this whole string into title case. Sound good? All right, so that was a fairly simple and fairly straightforward. We're just doing a dot title. A more complicated one that takes in arguments is dot replace. So to do a dot replace, let's see what it does. It returns a string where a specified value is replaced with a specified value. So let's say I wanted to take all my letter O's and turn them into X's. Let's say that's what I want to do. So let's take a look at dot replace and how we're going to do that. So right here in syntax, it tells you string dot replace old value, new value, count. And in these parameter values right here is actually very helpful. Sometimes these things are called arguments. Sometimes arguments are required and sometimes they're not. So for this case, you can see that we have to give it an old value. Like we want to replace all the O's with X's. We need to tell it, I want to replace O's. You have new value and you're saying, okay, I have to replace O's with X's. And count, I don't really care how many times I replace this. So I'm not going to give it that argument. So let's try this out. Let's copy this. We're going to go over here, dot replace, old value. I said we're going to replace O's. New value with X. And count we're going to ignore for this first go round. I'll add in count later just to see what the effect is. And so when I do this, hopefully all the O's get replaced with X's. Cool, see? So what we have here, a bunch of O's have become X's. Now we want to use the count just to like demonstrate. Let's say I do 2. It only replaces the first 2 O's. You might ask, like, why would we ever need to do this? I don't know. One day you're gonna come across a situation where you might have to do it, and it's good to know that it's there. A lot of times you might be working on something like really irritating with like cleaning text data. And honestly, there's just so much here that I think is always good to see if what you need to do is already built in rather than having to like do some like convoluted processes. Because sometimes people tend to overthink and surprisingly a lot of things are already built in. So definitely do not have to memorize all of this. I always forget that a lot of these exist. But it's a good idea to just like, look over them to know that they're there for your usage. Sound good? And I think it's a good idea to also like, you know, maybe practice once in a while. If something looks like it's going to be useful, like maybe, let's see, like formats specified values in a string, or like converting into lower uppercase. That could be something that you practice on like a random string here and there. Cool. So that's strings and string methods. There's so much you can do. Cool. So there's that. Next, there's numbers and math. The main numeric types that we have in Python are integers and floats. So an integer is basically any number that's a whole number from, I think, negative infinity to positive infinity, just anything that's a whole number without decimal places. So that's an integer, and a float is just anything with decimal points. So really quick, if you look at the type of the number 5, so something that's really helpful to remember is that Python has this cool like built-in type thing that if you just wrap type around any value, it'll tell you what data type it is. So here, if I run this type 5, it tells you it's an integer. Interestingly, if I do 5.0, it's a float. And so there are a lot of little things here, like if you were to add a float and an integer together, it automatically coerces to an integer, to a float, sorry. These are the little things that you can play around with. You can do math in Python. That's great. You do 1 plus 5, for example, to 6. Two really important like math functions that will come up are modulo and the double slash, which is floor division. So if you're familiar with division, when you divide like a bigger number by a smaller number, you're going to have a quotient, which is the number of times something divides into something. So the quotient is here, which is like floor division. How do I explain what a quotient is? Like 16 divided by 3 is going to be 5 with remainder 1. So quotient is 5. So that's what that is. And modulo just gives you the remainder. Typical uses for this is modulo is always used like if you want to check if something is even or odd, you always do like a modulo 2, check for something if modulo 2 is true. And then double slashes sometimes is also helpful for when you want to like cap values at like, let's say you only want to do an action every 5 times. You would do something like that. Cool. So numbers, there's a lot to explore, but it's mostly just like math, and just know that it's its own data type in Python. Any questions?
More of a, I guess, related to the platform. Does it like have an auto return function, or will we ever have to do like return or print?
So yeah, so that's kind of like this like auto return thing that's happening here is a very Jupyter Notebook specific thing. So like Jupyter Notebook would just output whatever the final line is. And this is not saving the values to anything. So it's just outputting the last line of any cell. We will get to like print statements and return statements, especially when we talk about functions in section 3. Awesome.
Yish,
Yeah.
does this hold good for any kind of notebooks, or it's only specific? All this, right, are specific to only Jupyter Notebook, or any kind of, let's say, I think I read somewhere PyCharm is also there, or something like that.
Yeah, so it depends on the file type. So PyCharm, I'm not too sure, but PyCharm, to my memory, mostly uses .py files. So remember I was talking about up here where there's a difference between notebook files and Python files. PyCharm mainly works with .py files. There are some platforms that use both. Like I think if anyone uses like Microsoft VS Code, I heard that they recently added a notebook functionality. But yeah.
Yeah, last time I downloaded the VS Notebook, but then what happened was, after that there were a lot of functionalities which were happening in Git Bash and things. It started changing. So I'm anyway clueless about things. But when it started changing, then I was like, okay, let's stop it.
Yeah, I can tell you that when I tried using VS Code, it actually broke my computer. Like it overheated my entire computer. It was using like 600%. I don't know what it is. I never figured it out. But yeah, great question. Yeah,
Okay.
that's like one of the differences between .py and notebook files.
Okay.
All right. So moving on, we also have the data type Booleans, and Booleans is where it brings in like logic statements. So mainly the main things are you have true, false, there's also and, or, and there's also not. So these are all keywords in Python. So just remember when you're like naming your variables, never name them anything that turns green in your Jupyter notebook. So what's really cool is these kind of work like, basically when you run a cell with a bunch of these, it will evaluate the value of that cell. I know that it kind of gets kind of philosophical if you haven't like really played around with logic yet, but don't worry about it. It's kind of intuitive. So here in this cell, I have true and true. And so true and true will evaluate into true. That makes sense. Here we have two statements. We have two cells here, true and false, and also true or false. So what's going to happen here is true and false actually evaluates to false because the cell is evaluating everything that's happening in the cell. Is it true and is it false? And they're taking the final truth value of that cell.
Is it similar to that, right? Plus and minus mathematic?
Kind of. It's not exactly like, because if you have like two falses, it doesn't make a true. So it's not really like math, but it will make more sense when you have like a specific situation that you're testing. But just know that like there are and or operators that can help you change the truth value of a cell. And I think in the labs, there's a pretty good like comprehensive exercise on all of this stuff. So true and false evaluates to false, true or false actually evaluates into true. And then something that's actually a lot more similar to the negative sign in math is the not. So not false will evaluate to true, and not true evaluates to false. So not just like flips everything around. Interestingly, something that's kind of cool is you can do brackets as well. So true and false initially evaluated to false, but if we do a not with that, it becomes true. So you can like, it's kind of confusing, I admit, but you're probably not going to do anything as complicated as this ever, but it's just good to know that these are data types in Python.
So this is essentially like a argument, right?
Kind of, yeah. Sometimes, so arguments can be Booleans. So I think I have a section later that I think will make a little bit more sense and like tie it together. Hopefully, like this variable section, hopefully will make a little bit more sense when I talk about like what happens here. So this is just like tying all the data types together when we're talking about variables. So prior to this, I haven't spoken about variables yet, but variables is basically you can assign any data to a variable just to like save it and store it in that form. So for example, if I just didn't want to type the number 5 and I wanted to instead type the word 5, I can assign 5 to a variable. And I'm doing the same assignment for 8.5. And also let's say I want to assign this string saying, here are some words to the variable words. And then I also have a variable, is it being equal to true? So let's run that, and that does all the assignments. So just to show like how variables work, 5 and 8.5, each of them actually store the integer and the float respectively. So if I do this, 5 plus 8.5 is going to give me 13.5. So the value of the variable is stored in the variable itself. Does it make sense? To me, I was, yeah.
If I change 5 into and numerically I just put as 7.
Yeah. Yep.
In
It's going
that
to change.
case, this will.
Absolutely. So you see if this is now 7, this turns to 15.5.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This was actually a concept that when I was first learning how to code, it was kind of hard for me to grasp. So I think it just takes a little bit of time and practice, unfortunately. But cool. And here I have the string words, and here I'm using dot split. And does anyone know what dot split does?
I'd assume it splits the sentence up into individual words.
Absolutely, yeah. So dot split, if we just like quickly look at documentation again, dot split, and we look at the syntax, it splits the, actually no, let's look at this first. It splits the string into a list. And by default, it splits it by white space. But if you want, you can also tell it to split on a specific character. So here you have the separator, and by default, it's white space. So if something is default, you don't have to put anything, you don't have to put any arguments down. So because words is assigned to the long string, and I do words dot split, it splits it into a list of words. Hopefully this answers your question earlier about like what this means, like whether it is an argument. It's kind of, I wouldn't call like Booleans an argument. I would say it's more like it wants to evaluate something. And it's very conceptual and a little meta, but maybe this will help. So right now I have, is it being equal to true? Not is it would evaluate to false. And interestingly, if I go to like replace this true with is it works the same. Does that make sense? It's kind of confusing. Like with this Boolean stuff, you won't work with too much directly. So I wouldn't worry super much about it. Awesome. So these
question on is when you say is it equals true, is it you're saying the variable is true, or is it like a method within Python?
Yeah, so is it is just a variable. I can name it whatever I want.
Right, okay.
And then just I'm just assigning true to that variable.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And there are cases in where something like that is important, and hopefully we'll see it as we keep practicing Python.
So against is it, if I put false, then on the top it will become false plus false, false or false kind of.
Yeah. So if I have is it being equal to false, and this one will be not false and false, which actually I think becomes true. Yeah. It's this honestly, like, yeah, it comes with a bit of practice, but basically not that is it, sorry, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was curious because you had the variable below, like, so you now I think I figured it out because that says line 29 and that's line 28, even though it's on. I was confused on the order of operations, I guess, of like how was your line 29 up there recognizing this variable with the variables below it. Yeah. But now I think I figured out it ran this one below at 28, even though this one's above it.
Yeah, right? That's actually something that's really awesome that you pointed out. It's like a special feature of Jupyter Notebook that you can actually run parts of it. And so that's actually a huge difference between like notebook files and Python files, is that like in a notebook, you can run specific parts and you can run them out of order as well, which is why I could change the value of this and then go back up and change it because it remembers that this was already run and see like this was input 28, here's input 29. So yeah, it kind of like you can run that. Whereas in Python files, it runs everything in order at once.
Gotcha.
That's a really good thing to point out. Not many people catch that, which is good. Cool. So that was those are the main data types of Python, being like Booleans, numeric values and strings, and variables that are something they can save things to. Next, we're going to go into collections. Based on the time right now, I have a feeling we're gonna run a little over. This stuff goes a little in depth into dictionaries, a little too much, but I want to come back to this in our section 3 study group, because this gets a little more intense than it needs to be for section 1. But first, we're just going to talk really quickly about lists. So lists are, list is basically, a list is a collection of data, and it can house any kind of data. You can have numbers, you can have strings, you can have Booleans. You can also have lists within lists, which is great. So that's what it does. Very important properties of lists is that they are ordered, and lists being ordered is what allows us to index lists. So what that means is, if I want to get the 4th element of the list, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, which is number 3, and as we know, indexing starts from 0. If I want to get the 4th element of the list, I just have to call it by its index number, and I can get 3. So the property of the list, the fact that lists are ordered, allows us to get its elements using indexing. The next thing is that lists are mutable. Mutable basically means that they can be changed. They can be changed by like adding things to the list, removing things from the list, changing specific values in a list. And your lab goes really, really in depth into all the different things you can do. Most commonly, I think the thing that I use most is actually the append function when I want to add things to a list. So here I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hello, true, and I want to add a number 8 to it. And so what I have here, the word destructive, it just means that when I do a dot append, it's a method that edits the list immediately. And I'm going to compare it with something else that's not destructive just to see the difference. When I append 8, and then here you see how I'm just typing out my list to output my list. So that's another instance of like notebooks only outputting the last line. So anyways, I output the list and you can see I have added the number 8 to the list. What's pretty cool about lists is you can add lists and lists. So let's say I have this list currently, which is 0 to 8 with a couple random values. I can do plus another list, plus 9 and 10. However, because this is not a destructive method, just doing adding is not destructive, it didn't actually edit my variable. Does that make sense? And does that like show the difference between a destructive method and a non-destructive method? So I'm going to zoom in a little bit.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat it.
So real quick, like I get that what you're talking about is mutating. Like, so like if you add something into the list is changed. Now there's an 8 into it, where maybe on some of this other stuff that the mutation doesn't change. What happened with the 9 and 10 though? Like, so you ran the variable, but there's no 9 and 10. So where is that?
Yep, that's something that I wanted to demonstrate. So this is a destructive method. So I'm doing the dot append, and therefore you see how like my list has changed, right? It's changed from this to something that has an 8 at the back. So that's a destructive method. When I'm doing my list plus 9, 10, it's not changing my variable. It's simply just like outputting. So let's say I did this.
Oh, okay.
I'm just doing plus 9, 10. There, it shows me that there is 9 and 10. But if I were to change the last line to just output what my list is, you can see that that simple addition didn't really change my function. What you can do is you can reassign a variable. Like let's say I do my list is equal to my list plus 9, 10. Look, that updates. But if I only had that and I didn't reassign the variable, I'm going to run it from the top so that it's the old version. It doesn't actually save the 9 and 10 in the list. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, I know that there are so many concepts that I'm throwing at you today, but yeah, that's like one that's kind of important.
Because you're calling my list only right there, right? Like, and
Yep,
so,
exactly.
yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And so a destructive method, if you want to like add a list to a list, there is dot extend. And so dot extend is very similar to dot append, but it just extends a list with another list. So you can see here when I do this dot extend method, it does add the 9 and 10 at the end.
So what would happen if we were to extend it with, you know, not necessarily numbers, but, you know, words or Booleans?
Yeah, we can do that as well. We can do like true, false, hey. And because it already has 9 and 10, when I run this cell again, it's going to add 9 and 10 again because that's what I'm doing here. So we see this. Once I ran that cell, it had 9 and 10, and then 9 and 10 true, false, and hey. So that's why.
Keep going. Sorry. No,
So that's basically like, sorry. That's basically showing that this is a destructive method.
What is the difference between extend and append? Like they're both putting, like they're both destructing, and is it just one that like extend you could put multiple things into it, or append might be one? Is that the only difference?
Exactly. So if you see like what is given in dot append, it's just the value 8, whereas in extend you give it a list. I believe if you do a dot extend and just a number, it doesn't let you do that.
Gotcha.
The dot extend only extends by a list. Cool. Awesome. And really quickly, whenever you have a collection, you can loop through it. I think I'm going to end right here when we're right after I talk about this, and we can talk about dictionaries next time. But basically, you can loop through your list, and looping is a concept that is also, I think, if you're new to coding, kind of hard to grasp. So let's take a look at my list again. So my list is now all of this. For thing in my list, print thing. This is going to print out all the elements of my list. So how a for loop works, you can run a for loop on any collection. So it's basically saying for every element that exists in any list, you're going to do whatever you want it to do. Does that make sense? It is a tricky concept to explain. But how a for loop works is it basically looks through your list, starts at the first element. It's looking at, let's see. So for example, in my list, the first element is 0, right? So at the first go round, thing refers to 0. And then it's just going to print thing. It's going to print 0. And how for loops work is it just does the same thing for every element in the list. Cool.
Again, coming back. So if we change the word thing and put it something else, some random name, so, and then print it, will it have the same result?
Yeah. So this can be anything you want. So if I want it for t in my list, the thing is, whatever you put here will be the temporary variable that that each element is in your list is assigned to.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I do for t in my list, I can't print thing because thing is, they still recognize thing as the last thing from before. So that's wrong. But I would have to print t, and all of that stuff is there. A function that does exactly the same thing, but could come in handy is, let's see, just to show you, this outputs the exact same thing, but it's a slightly different way of looping through a list. So sometimes you care about where in the list something exists. And so you care about the index of elements. So this is just a slightly different way of looping through a list. It has a couple different new parts to it. We have a couple keywords here. Here you can see there's len, which stands for length. And so let's see what that is. So length just tells you the length of any list. So the length of my list here is 16. What the range function does, range, let's see what it outputs. Range outputs, oh, this is not useful. I'm just gonna coerce this real quick to see what range does. Range basically makes a list from 0 up to that number. So what you're really looping over here when you're doing for I in range len my list, is you're looping over this. You're looping over 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. And you can see that there's something a little bit different here. We're printing my list index I. So whereas for this one, we're referring to each element directly, in this case, we're referring to each element using its index. Yeah. There will be times where you decide to use this instead of the one above. Hard to like give you like a good example right now, but yeah. Cool. Anything that anyone wants me to clarify at this point?
Yeah, I'm just confused with.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of time for it to sink in. I'm gonna send this notebook out to your Slack channel. You can just like save it onto your desktop or honestly save it anywhere on your computer. You can like open it up and you can like play around with all of these that I'm showing you right now. And plus this video will be up as well, hopefully by tomorrow morning. So in terms of material, there's still a little bit more, but this stuff I'm gonna talk about either Monday if we have time after talking about Git or section 3. If anyone needs to go, feel free to leave, but I also want to really introduce this really awesome resource. I linked it up here. I linked here a specific problem, but there's this website called HackerRank. And HackerRank is awesome because it's basically a repository of practice questions for a bunch of different coding languages. I love HackerRank because I honestly, like, I think I got good at coding. So I started Flatiron School with 0 coding experience. And my instructor then told me about this. And I like started practicing a lot of like little problems. Basically, they'll give you things like, given that you have a list of numbers, print out the even numbers, something like that. And they go in increasing difficulty. There's like a Python course here. And they're really just like a set of little questions. So I can show you an example. Actually, I'll show you the example that was in here. So they're just like really simple tasks. Given an integer, if it's odd, print that it's weird. If it's even, blah, blah, blah. So I highly recommend that you guys like sign up for an account on HackerRank. It's free. Another thing is it has, well, one, it has Python, it has SQL, it has a bunch of other languages if you want to practice that. Also, a lot of companies do their technical interviews on HackerRank. So if you do like a bunch of problems, I've actually had an interview once that was a HackerRank problem on HackerRank that a company just decided to like repurpose for their own technical interview. So if you just do a bunch of them, you might see a question that you've done before during an interview, and that's awesome. So I really, really like this resource. I think like if you want to practice coding, and I think sometimes the labs are hard because they have like one long narrative and it's hard to like keep focus and follow through with all of that. These are much shorter problems and it just gets you used to thinking programmatically. So I really wanted to introduce this. This is what was linked in the spreadsheet of links that I have here. Cool. Any questions before we wrap up?
So this is Swan and W3 school, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is.
Yeah, W3 schools is where I found like all the string methods. They have a lot of things here, like you can see like list methods, dictionary methods. They have a lot of stuff here. If you were to Google things, a lot of times this website comes up. And they're both linked in this notebook as well. So I'll send this out and you'll have them as well. Cool. Let's see, just to wrap up, again, please set up your one-on-ones with me. You have to have a one-on-one by the end of next week. You get half an hour every week. I think like, I mean, you're paying for this kind of, so just use it. If you don't have any questions, I don't know, we can chat. Also, as we go through the course, there are also like really popular interview questions that come up with every section. So I'll always like, if you don't have any questions to ask, I'll throw those at you to make sure that you understand what you're doing. But yeah, schedule your one-on-ones with me and with Dara if you haven't. I will send out this notebook. If you have environment setup problems, please let me know sooner rather than later. And yeah. any closing questions? Awesome. Study groups don't tend to go over very much, I think, because we had a bunch of questions at the start that this one did. Thank you all for sticking around. I will post this recording hopefully by tomorrow morning. And yeah, if there are no other questions, I'm always on Slack. But have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Good night.